Okay, so we're resuming in Exodus chapter 7. We left off going over the event where Aaron's rod turns into the serpent and it devours the other staff/serpents of the Egyptian priests. And we talked about how God, showing his superiority over the Egyptian priests, but then also how the Egyptian priests might be demonic influences, it might be smoke and mirrors. Either way, doesn't really change too much of what's at the core is the fact that, God's showing his dominion and judgment over the Egyptian gods. And then in verse 13, we read, still Pharaoh's heart was hardened. So we're keeping track of that. So Pharaoh's heart is hardened again. Could be by himself, it could be by God. And that brings us to the first plague, which is the water of the Nile turning to blood. All right, so that would be a completely devastating for an agrarian society like Egypt. Your water source that's watering all your crops is now blood. Everything used for fishing, fish are now going to be dead. The Nile was seen as a goddess by the Egyptians, so it's as if the goddess of the Nile herself was killed and now bled out. We're going to jump ahead to chapter 8. The second plague is the frogs. And during the plague of the frogs in chapter 8, verse 8, then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, entreat the Lord to take away the frogs from me and my people, and I will let the people go to sacrifice the Lord. So Pharaoh is willing to relent. Then we jump ahead to verse 10. And he said, tomorrow, Moses said, be it as you say, that you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God. All right, so the point of all these plagues is for God to reveal himself. However, when they call off the plague of the frogs just end up dying. And they have to pile up all the frogs and burn their carcasses. And there's a stench throughout the land. And that makes Pharaoh angry. So in verse 15, we read, but when Pharaoh saw there was a respite, that is the odor from the burning frogs, he hardened his heart and would not listen to them as the Lord had said. So Pharaoh, we get here, is now hardening his heart, doing it of his own initiative. Verse 16 is the beginning of the plague of the gnats. Down in verse 19, the magicians said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. So after the third plague, the Egyptian priests are admitting that they're bested. Okay, that they're losing this battle with Yahweh. Put whatever other names the Egyptian gods have, Osiris, they got nothing on this guy. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened. He would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. Verse 25, Pharaoh calls Moses and Aaron, and he decides he's going to make a concession. Go sacrifice to your God within the land. So Pharaoh does give permission for the Israelites to have their sacrifice and ritual departing to Yahweh, but it has to be done in the land of Egypt. That begs the question, were they not permitted to worship Yahweh at all within the land? Was there an establishment that you have to be worshiping the Egyptian gods? Verse 26, but Moses said, it would not be right to do so, for we shall sacrifice to the Lord our God offerings abominable to the Egyptians. If we sacrifice offerings abominable to the Egyptians before their eyes, will they not stone us? We must go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God as he will command us. So Pharaoh said, I will let you go to sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness, only you shall not go very far away. Make entreaty for me. However, at the end, we read verse 32, but Pharaoh hardened his heart this time also and did not let the people go. Pharaoh, again, he's hardening his own heart. Fifth plague, it's the death of the Egyptian livestock. We read again at the end of verse 7, but the heart of Pharaoh was hardened and he did not let the people go. The sixth plague is a breakout of boils. Verse 11. And the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils were upon the magicians and upon all the Egyptians. But the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he did not listen to them, as the Lord had spoken to Moses. The seventh plague is thunder and hail. Then the Lord said to Moses, rise up early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh and say to him, thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, let my people go, that they may serve me. For this time I will send all my plagues upon your heart and upon your servants and your people. Why? That you may know that there is none like me in all the earth. So that expression from God, that you may know that there is none like me in all the earth. This is what scholars call stage one monotheism. Okay, in the early Old Testament, you're gonna find statements that God is greater than the other gods, or Yahweh is greater than the other gods. There is no God like Yahweh. And to keep it from becoming confusing, because it almost seems like the text is implying that the other gods do in fact exist. But what you gotta do is you gotta put yourself in the place of the intended audience, right? Who was this written for? Who are these people? All right, this is being composed by Moses for the Israelites as they're wandering through the wilderness. What's part of the Israelites' problem in the worldview of the nations around them? It's a polytheistic worldview. So stage one monotheism is getting pagans to recognize that Yahweh is the most powerful God. Stage two monotheism is coming to realize and understand that actually all the other gods are just fake idols and there is only one God, Yahweh. All right, but like in the progression of conversions, we call it stage one monotheism in this language of Yahweh is greater than all the other gods. All right, because from the mindset of someone who's a pagan in the ancient world, to say that, well, there are no gods, actually there's only one God, be a little bit drawing for the worldview. But they can grasp that concept that Yahweh is the strongest one. And then it follows that, well, okay, if these idols aren't doing anything, then they're fake. Verse 15, for by now I could have put forth my hand and struck you and your people with pestilence, and you would have been cut off from the earth. But for this purpose have I let you live, to show you my power, so that my name may be declared throughout all the earth. So God's telling Pharaoh, I let you live to show my power, and that my name may be declared throughout all the earth. Go ahead and make a note to Exodus 18:10. Exodus chapter 18, verse 10, and Joshua chapter 2, verses 8 through 14. Exodus 18:10 and Joshua chapter 2, verses 8 through 14. Yes, ma'am.
So if this were the case with them recognizing that Yahweh is the greatest God, how come we don't have, instances where the Egyptians make him part of their culture of gods and worship him as like why do they keep Ra as their most powerful god? Why don't we have records of them worshiping Yahweh?
So I don't want to spend too much time on this tangent, but actually, remember we had set the timeline context was like 1500 for the Exodus story. Before 1500, or like around that time, and if you want to this is something that like someone needs to go full Indiana Jones and figure out and do the research. Is there was a time in Egypt where there's a pharaoh who was trying to bring the whole nation to monotheism. And it would take a lot of work to do, but if you want to try to cross correlate that to like the time of Joseph, is something that you could speculate about. So there is records of like Egypt does try to ditch its paganism at some point. The real answer though is like these Egyptians, you will find there are some converts among the Egyptians in the end of the Exodus story. There are Egyptians who leave with Israel and ditch the pagan and polytheism behind. But the reality is that there are people who that they lack the fear of the Lord, right? And so for that reason, then they're gonna be, they just cling to their idols because they're foolish. And lots of people still do this today, right? People all over the world cling to their idols in our country instead of listening to the voice of God. So it's nothing new or uniquely foolish about this time period. Also, we will see there are times when the Israelites, they do try to put God as like one, Yahweh as one amongst the pantheon, and then it causes problems for them. So that does happen as well. Okay. So God's using these opportunities, right, to reveal himself to the whole earth, to the whole land. And in the verses I just gave you, Exodus 18:10 and Joshua chapter 2, we see that like there's instances where these pagans come around where like it's God's plan work, that news of what's happening with these 10 plagues is definitely spreading throughout the whole world. Jump down to verse 29. Moses said to him, "As soon as I have gone out of the city, I will stretch out my hands to the Lord. The thunder will cease, and there will be no more hail, that you may know that the earth is the Yahweh's. But as for you and your servants, I know that you do not yet fear the Lord God." And hence the plagues are going to continue. So that's the issue, is that Pharaoh doesn't fear God yet, so we have to keep these plagues rolling. Chapter 10, it's the plague of locusts. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go into Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, that I may show these signs of mine among them, and that you may tell in the hearing of your son and of your son's son how I have made sport of the Egyptians and what signs I have done among them, that you may know that I am Yahweh." So God's doing the plagues to reveal himself to all the nations. He's also doing these plagues for a catechetical purpose for the Israelites. All right, so this is also for the Israelites' benefits, that they can tell their children and their grandchildren what God has done for them, and so they can hold steadfast to his word. Jumping down to verse 7, and Pharaoh's servant said to him, "How long shall this man be a snare to us? Let the men go, that they may serve the Lord their God. Do you not yet understand that Egypt is ruined?" So Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh, and he said to them, "Go serve the Lord your God, but who are to go?" And Moses said, "We will go with our young and our old, we will go with our sons and daughters, and with our flocks and herds, for we must hold a feast to the Lord." And he said to them, "The Lord be with you, if I ever let you and your little ones go. Look, you have some evil purpose in mind. No, go the men among you and serve the Lord, for that is what you desire." And they were driven out from Pharaoh's presence. I bet throughout this whole process, Pharaoh is rationalizing to himself how he's doing a good job making all these concessions and not actually listening to the voice of God. And I think one of the moral lessons you can pull from that is when people are doing evil or they're doing wrong, we can rationalize evil all day. And we can think we're making concessions to following God all day. We're like, well, I'm cutting these little deals here. Like, shouldn't God be merciful to me? And the answer to the story is, well, no. Okay, you're not going to have fear of the Lord. You're not going to listen to his word. You're only going to bring ruin upon yourself and upon your people. Yeah, man.
How come they never killed Moses? Because he keeps on coming back all of the time and just walking into Pharaoh's palace and talking to Pharaoh.
Yeah.
How come they don't try to murder him?
I can't remember if I'm getting this confused with the Hollywood movie or if we're just somewhere in the text. If there's I think it's just in the movies. There's a little subplot that they try to kill him. Maybe they do, and it's just not mentioned. But Moses, he was like a prince of Egypt, right? He's a prophet amongst his people. You don't necessarily want to make a martyr of someone, because what if they kill Moses and there's an uprising? Also, while they don't respect Yahweh enough, they clearly are dealing with these plagues. So, he's a man of God. He's untouchable. to a certain extent, that you'd be too scared to even try to do something on him, lest something worse than thunder and hailstones smashing everything come down. We get to verse 21, and that's the 9th plague of darkness. I want you guys to make a note here to the book of Wisdom, chapters 17 through 19. Next to the 9th plague of darkness at verse 21.
17 to 19.
Yeah, Wisdom 17 through 19. And we are going to jump ahead and read from the book of Wisdom. Wisdom chapter 17 through 19. We're going to jump to the book of Wisdom. It might be called the Wisdom of Solomon. It's in the wisdom literature section. So you get to the historical books, and after the historical books, you get to the Psalms. It's after the Psalms. It's after the book of Proverbs. It's before any of the prophets. And we're going to get to the book of Wisdom, chapter 17. All right, so just in case anyone's unfamiliar, the plague of darkness, what happened is Egypt is sent into darkness, and it's like the sun gives no light. If they try to light fires, the fires give no light, and they're living and groping in pitch black in the land of Egypt. However, in the land of Goshen, there is still light. So there's this miraculous when you cross into Egypt, or if you cross into the land of the Hebrews, you'd be going from anyway, it's having normal day cycles to this pitch blackness. And that sounds pretty bad. But the book of Wisdom gives us a little extra insight into what this plague consisted of and what its worst aspect actually was. So here at chapter 17 in the book of Wisdom, you can go ahead and make a note back to Exodus chapter 10, verse 21. And I'll just start reading. Great are your judgments and hard to describe. Therefore, uninstructed souls have gone astray. For when lawless men suppose that they held the holy nation in their power, they themselves lay as captives of darkness and prisoners of long night, shut in under their roofs, exiles from eternal providence. This is a reference to the Egyptians. For thinking that in their secret sins they were unobserved, behind a dark curtain of forgetfulness, they were scattered, terribly alarmed, and appalled by specters. So while the Egyptians commit their secret sins, that during this time of darkness, they're actually having visions of specters, all right, or this torment from demons, according to the book of Wisdom. For not even their inner chamber that held them protected them from fear, but terrifying sounds rang out around them, and dismal phantoms with gloomy faces appeared, and no power of fire was able to give light, nor did the brilliant flames of the stars avail to illumine that hateful night. Nothing was shining through to them except a dreadful self-kindled fire, and in terror they deemed the things which they saw to be worse than that unseen appearance. The delusions of their magic art lay humbled, and their boasted wisdom was scornfully rebuked. For those who promised to drive off the fears and disorders of a sick soul were sick themselves with ridiculous fear. So on and so forth. So, the Egyptians, they're worshiping these pagan gods, and during this time of darkness, they're actually coming face to face with the demons that they invite into their homes, the demons that they actually worship. And they're all freaked out by it, okay? So, like, demons are real. Demonology is an actual subject. And part of this plague was that the Egyptians had to actually deal with the reality of what their religion was that it entailed, okay? There's a disturbing rise in America of, like, these same occult practices going on, all right? But what these people are doing when they, when they toy around with magic, witchcraft, or get into occult practices, whether it's Norse mythology or Egyptian mythology, it's like makes its comeback. they're inviting these demons into their lives, right? And there are things that actually do go bump in the dark, right? As the Egyptians found out the hard way through this plague, according to the Book of Wisdom. All right, so the plague of darkness comes in at the end of verse 23. They did not see one another, nor did any arise from his place for 3 days. But all the sons of Israel had light where they dwelt. Verse 24. Then Pharaoh called Moses and said, "Go serve the Lord. Your children may also go with you. Only let your flocks and your herds remain behind." Then in verse 27, we read, "But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go." All right. We've had 9 plagues so far, and that brings us to the 10th plague, which is going to be the death of the firstborn. Yeah.
So it says the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. Does that mean like he's making the Pharaohs say no?
When was I going to talk? I have like a note somewhere. Yeah, let's talk about this now. Okay, good question. So we've gone through this throughout the text, right? And we've seen there's instances where Pharaoh's hardening his own heart and God's hardening his heart, right? And what this is doing is this is giving us an insight into the mystery of how salvation works out and also how grace is given. And I'm using that word mystery quite intentionally because it's not something that it's not something that's fully even ironed out by theologians. Okay, there's actually like 2 different schools of thought in it, and it's a very complicated topic. But I'll try to just summarize in this way. What we're seeing in the book of Exodus is this synergy between God and Pharaoh. Pharaoh's hardening his own heart, and then we get references to God hardening his heart. To flip it from the negative of hardening a heart, think about the aspect of softening one's heart, okay? Or like doing good as opposed to evil. Whenever you do something good, you are cooperating with God's grace. If God was not giving you the grace to do whatever good deed you're prompted to, then you would not be able to do that. And there's like a line from one of the Gospels where Jesus says, "Without me, you can do nothing." And so a lot of theologians read into that passage, it's without Christ, or without the cooperating Christ's grace, there is nothing that we can do. The ultimate mystery is that all our salvation comes from Jesus, right? It comes from Christ. We cannot attribute our salvation to ourselves. You can't say like, well, I'm the one who chose to get baptized. All right, you would not have the inclination to even go and get baptized if it was not for God's grace working in your heart, prompting you to that, and you're cooperating with his grace. All right? So what's going on with Pharaoh, God hardening Pharaoh's heart, and Pharaoh hardening his own heart, like one way you can look at it is like God is not giving him the grace to do this. And Pharaoh is completely cooperating and not even wanting to let the Israelites go anyhow. Okay. So that's just a very brief, like scratching the surface of the topic. We don't have time to jump into that. I think when you guys took like the mystery of redemption in Christ's course, probably should have been like sophomore year, you would have like gone over this topic a little bit, but like you can take graduate level courses on salvation theology. It's called soteriology, and it's not my field of expertise. I just know a little bit enough to be dangerous to myself and others. But that is the insight, that there's a synergy going on between Pharaoh and God, and that same synergy goes on even when you're doing good. All right, that you're doing good because God's prompting you and giving you the grace to do it. So you can't take credit for any good thing you do. Right? It's like why true humility is just recognizing your role in relation to God. And that would also include that, like, okay, the fact that, like, I didn't commit a mortal sin today, it's like, grace be to God. Because it's from his abundance of his goodness that I was able to be preserved from that. Does anyone have any follow-up questions on soteriology? Yes.
So every time you commit a mortal sin, God's not giving you grace.
No, you'd be refusing to cooperate with his grace. Yeah. And I hesitate to make a full statement like when God is hardening Pharaoh's heart, what exactly does that mean? I don't want to I know enough to know that if I try to make a comment to explain, I'll probably screw it up. So just recognize the pattern of the synergy, the interplay going on between the two. Yeah. Sure. Okay. So chapter 11, Pharaoh gets the warning of the final plague that's about to come. Verse 3, and the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's servants, and in the sight of the people. So Pharaoh goes and Moses goes and speaks to Pharaoh. I just want to draw your attention to verse 8. At the end of verse 8, it says that, and he, that's Moses, went out from Pharaoh in hot anger. Again, it's just another instance of Moses having this personality trait of being a hothead. And let that bring us to chapter 12, the institution of the Passover. So the institution of the Passover, this is the first Easter. And I want you to make note of some of the linguistics of this. So it's only in English and German languages that we call Easter, or we call Passover Easter. Easter is a Germanic term that's part of the English language. If you speak any other language, at the end of Lent, the holiday you're celebrating, it's called Passover. All right, so in Italian, Pasqua. In Spanish, Pasch, okay? It's always, that root is connected back to Passover. So we gotta don't think of a disconnect between, you should not have a disconnect between Passover for the Hebrews and Easter for the Christians. All right, the change in vocab creates a disconnect in our minds that should not be there. All right, it's an unfortunate byproduct of our language. So chapter 12, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this month shall be for you the beginning of months. All right, so the month of Passover is going to be the beginning of the Judaic calendar. For the Hebrews, their New Year begins with Passover. And it's also the first night of their festal cycle. So we are going to study and memorize and learn the festal cycle for the Hebrews because it's important for understanding the rest of the Old Testament and consequently the New Testament as well. So this is the first major feast, and it's also going to be their New Year. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Tell the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, they shall make every man a lamb according to their father's houses, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for a lamb, then a man and his neighbor next to his house shall take according to the number of persons, according to what each can eat, you shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male a year old. You shall take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th of the month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs in the evening. Then they shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts of the lintel of the houses in which they eat them. Verse 8, highlight, they shall eat the flesh that night, roasted with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, they shall eat it. All right, so this Passover lamb, we have two images going on here. First, the blood of the lamb is going to be what's going to save the Israelites from death. The blood of the lamb being spread on the lintels of their doorpost, right? The blood of the lamb on the wood is going to be what saves them. And the flesh of the lamb that they have to eat, it's a sacrifice. All right, when you sacrifice something, you're not just killing it and then leaving it in the field. You then have a little party when you sacrifice something to any god. Same thing with Yahweh. You eat it. You then have to eat the victim that's sacrificed, so you participate in the sacrifice. The flesh of the lamb is also going to be food for their journey, because they're about to take a hike out into the wilderness. All right, and you can't necessarily like pack up your house, carry your belongings, and everything you just stole from the Egyptians on a salad. All right, you need to have something with more substance to get you going through. So the sacrifice of this lamb, it's going to save them from death, and it's also going to be food for their journey. Verse 9, do not eat any of it raw or boiled with water, but roasted, its head with its legs and its inner parts. And you shall let none of it remain until the morning. Anything that remains until the morning you shall burn. In this manner you shall eat it, your loins girded, and your sandals on your feet, and your staff in hand, and you shall eat it in haste. All right, so loin skirt, what that means is if you're wearing a longer tunic, I'll dismiss you at this point. Loin skirt is, if you have a longer tunic, you're pulling it up from underneath and you're tucking it into your belt. So you've kind of changed your longish robe into shorts so that you can be more agile and move about quickly. And they're eating with their staff in hand and sandals on because they are going to get out of Egypt immediately after this meal. Packed and ready to go.